The first thing that jolted Jack Carter awake that morning wasn't his alarm clock or the smell of coffee. It was the deep, guttural roar of heavy machinery. The sound sent a chill down his spine. It was wrong. Too early. Too loud. And far too close. Still groggy, he stumbled to the window, his pulse quickening at what he saw. A convoy of yellow bulldozers and dump trucks had lined up in front of his cousin David Carter's home, their family's ancestral house for over 70 years. His blood ran cold. Workers in neon vests were moving with military precision, placing demolition markers around the yard, rolling out heavy-duty fencing as if they had been planning this for months. Then he saw her, the puppet master behind it all. Victoria Harper. She stood at the center of it, effortlessly poised in her designer workout gear, tapping away on her iPad with that same smug, self-satisfied smirk she always wore at HOA meetings. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone, yanked on his sneakers, and bolted out the door. "Stop! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Jack's voice boomed across the yard, but no one even flinched. They kept working like a well-oiled machine. Victoria turned at the sound of his voice, her expression shifting into one of mock surprise. "Oh, Jack," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're up early. I was just about to call you." Jack's jaw clenched. He could already tell this was planned down to the last detail. "This house belongs to David. He's serving overseas. You can't just bulldoze it." Victoria let out a small, condescending laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, sweetie, I think you're a little confused. The HOA had an emergency meeting last night. We voted unanimously to proceed with demolition." Jack blinked. "What? That's impossible. There's no way." Victoria casually pulled up a digital document on her iPad and held it out for him to see. "According to our revised HOA guidelines," she said smoothly, "this property has been deemed structurally unsafe, an eyesore, and in violation of multiple community standards." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. You can't do this. You didn't even give notice. The law requires—" Victoria sighed dramatically, as if bored. "Actually, federal protections for deployed service members require a 14-day notice before any HOA action." Her perfectly manicured finger tapped on the screen. "Our vote. 13 days before David's scheduled return." Jack felt the air leave his lungs. She had done her homework. This wasn't incompetence. This was a calculated attack. "Your cousin abandoned this property, Jack," she continued, voice turning sharper. "It's been sitting here, neglected, bringing down home values." "That's a lie," Jack growled. "I've been maintaining it. Every weekend. Look at it." Victoria made a slow, exaggerated gesture toward the freshly trimmed hedges and the immaculate paintwork. Then she clicked her tongue in mock disapproval. "Paint color is 2 shades off from the HOA-approved palette. The hedges are half an inch too high. And don't even get me started on that brass knocker. So outdated." Jack's hands curled into fists. "You're using technicalities to steal his home." Victoria's smirk grew. "No, Jack. I'm following the rules." Before Jack could respond, the deep rumble of an engine sent vibrations through the pavement. He turned just in time to see a massive bulldozer lurch forward, inching toward the porch. Panic surged through him. "Stop!" Jack sprinted forward, positioning himself directly in front of the machine. The bulldozer jerked to a halt, the operator hesitating. The man looked at Victoria, waiting for her signal. Victoria sighed and waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, Jack, don't be dramatic." Jack turned to the 2 police officers standing nearby. "Do something. This is illegal." One of them shrugged. "This is a civil matter. We're just here to make sure everything stays peaceful." Peaceful? Jack's stomach twisted. They were in on it. Behind him, workers began dragging debris fencing around the house, sealing off the property like a crime scene. He was running out of time. His mind raced. David's daughter, Sarah, she was at college, but she needed to know. Jack pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Uncle Jack?" "Sarah," he said, his voice urgent. "Something's wrong. They're coming for the house. Victoria planned this. She's moving faster than we thought." A long silence. Then Sarah's voice, shaking. They can't. All of Dad's things, Mom's garden. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. I don't think they care. Sarah inhaled sharply. But Dad's supposed to be home in 2 weeks. Jack's stomach sank. They know that. A new voice cut through the air. Victoria's husband, Robert Harper, head of a local construction company. Jack turned to see him walking the perimeter with a team of men in suits, pointing at specific areas of the yard. Jack stiffened. That's when the truth hit him like a gut punch. This wasn't just about HOA rules. This wasn't just about home values. This had been planned for months. Jack's grip tightened around his phone. Sarah, listen to me. We need to fight back. We need to stop them before it's too late. Sarah swallowed hard. How? Jack exhaled slowly, staring at Victoria as she smiled victoriously from her front porch, watching him like a hunter sizing up prey. I don't know yet, he admitted. But we're not going down without a fight. Victoria tilted her head, her smirk deepening. Better take some pictures, Jack, she called out sweetly. For the memories. Jack clenched his jaw. She had no idea. The war was just beginning. Jack sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of HOA documents, violation notices, and old meeting minutes. His fingers drummed against the wood as he flipped through pages, each line confirming what he already suspected. This wasn't just a spontaneous decision by Victoria. It was a long, calculated scheme. Outside, the sound of construction workers drilling into the pavement echoed through the quiet suburban streets. The first phase of their plan was already in motion. They weren't waiting for legal battles. They weren't waiting for objections. They were moving fast. Jack exhaled sharply, scrolling through his email inbox. Nothing from David. Military communications were restricted during his mission, which meant he had no idea his home was about to be erased from existence. They were counting on that. He clenched his jaw. Not if I can help it. A hidden plan. A silent war. Determined to dig deeper, Jack spent the rest of the day searching through HOA records, comparing old policies against the new ones Victoria had implemented. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Then, a particular document caught his eye. A community development proposal from last month's meeting minutes. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he read the fine print. The state-of-the-art community center wasn't just some vague idea. It had been fully drafted, planned, and approved months ago. Before any of this started. His stomach churned. They never intended to give David a chance. His hands shook as he pulled up the next document, a contract agreement with Harper and Kerber's Construction. Signed 3 months before Victoria started citing violations against David's property. Jack's vision narrowed. Her husband's company. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. This wasn't just about enforcing HOA regulations. This was fraud. This was theft. They had already signed the land away. A dangerous encounter. Jack grabbed his keys, determination flooding through his veins. If the HOA was corrupt, maybe someone on the inside had seen something they weren't supposed to. There was only one person who might have answers. Sarah Dawson. Sarah had worked as the HOA secretary for 2 years before abruptly resigning. Rumor had it that she had a falling out with Victoria. Jack had a feeling it wasn't about personal differences. He found her at a small diner outside town, her wary eyes darting to the door as he slid into the booth across from her. You shouldn't have called me, she muttered, stirring her coffee. Sarah, Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice. Victoria is stealing David's house. She planned this. I have proof. Sarah let out a hollow laugh. Of course she planned it. She's been planning it for years. But you don't get it, Jack. You can't win this. She owns everyone. Jack frowned. What do you mean? Sarah hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her purse and slid it across the table. Jack unfolded it. It was an email chain between Victoria and a city zoning official. Subject: Community Center, Fast Track Approval. The date was 7 months ago, long before David's house was ever put on notice. Jack's grip tightened around the paper. This was proof that the whole thing was a setup. Why are you helping me? He asked. Sarah sighed, looking around nervously. Because I made the mistake of asking too many questions once. She made sure I lost my job. I thought if I stayed quiet, she'd leave me alone. Jack nodded slowly. And has she? Sarah's silence was answer enough. The first real threat. That night, as Jack drove home, his mind raced with everything he had uncovered. He finally had the missing piece. Victoria wasn't just abusing her power. She was manipulating the city itself. She had lawyers, officials, even police officers in her pocket. He was going to need reinforcements. Jack reached for his phone to call David's lawyer. And that's when he noticed the headlights in his rearview mirror. The black SUV had been following him for the past 5 minutes. His pulse quickened. He made a sudden left turn. The SUV turned too. Jack's hands tightened around the wheel. A second later, the SUV gunned its engine. Jack barely had time to react before the vehicle swerved into his lane, trying to force him off the road. His heart pounded. He yanked the wheel to the right, skidding onto a side street, tires screeching against the pavement. The SUV didn't stop. It accelerated. Jack slammed his foot on the gas, weaving through the neighborhood, cutting down side streets, searching for any way to lose them. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the SUV peeled off down a side road, disappearing into the night. Jack's breaths came fast and ragged. His fingers were shaking against the steering wheel. That wasn't a warning. That was a message. They knew what he was doing. And now, they were letting him know. Back off. Or else. The battle lines are drawn. Jack sat in his parked car outside David's house, adrenaline still surging through his veins. The front porch light flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows over the yard. Jack wasn't afraid of HOA fines. He wasn't afraid of legal battles. But this? This was something else. They were willing to play dirty. They were willing to put his life on the line to protect their scheme. Jack exhaled, gripping his phone. "Sarah," he said when she picked up. "Jack, what's wrong?" "Listen to me carefully. They just tried to run me off the road." There was silence on the other end. Then, a quiet, fearful whisper. "Oh God, Jack, you don't understand. This goes deeper than just David's house." Jack closed his eyes. Of course it did. This wasn't just about one home. This was bigger. Much bigger. And he had just become their biggest problem. Jack barely slept that night. His mind replayed the SUV chasing him down, the warning that came too close for comfort. They weren't just playing dirty anymore. They were getting desperate. He wasn't backing down. By dawn, he was already on his laptop, poring over every document, every transaction, every shady HOA decision that had led to this moment. Somewhere in the mess of fraud, fake violations, and secret land deals, there had to be a way to take Victoria down. And then, he found it. The smoking gun buried in an old property deed from 1950. Jack discovered something stunning. The Carter family home was legally protected. According to the documents, when David's grandfather bought the land, it was part of a historic preservation deal, meaning the house couldn't be demolished without state-level approval. Victoria never got that approval. His breath caught. If he could prove that Victoria had broken state law, everything she had built, including her corrupt HOA empire, would come crashing down. The first move. Jack didn't waste a second. He grabbed his keys and headed straight for the county clerk's office, armed with the property deed and a newfound determination. Inside, he found an older man named Robert King, a veteran clerk who had worked in real estate law for decades. Jack placed the deed on the desk. "I need to verify something." Robert adjusted his glasses, squinting at the paperwork. As his eyes moved down the page, his brow furrowed. "This is..." He trailed off, flipping through pages. "This property is under historical protection." Jack nodded. "Can the HOA override that?" Robert shook his head firmly. "Not without approval from the State Historical Preservation Office." Jack felt his pulse quicken. "Can you check if they ever got that approval?" Robert tapped on his keyboard, navigating through the system. Seconds passed. Then his fingers stopped. "No request," Robert murmured. "Nothing. They never even applied." Jack clenched his fists. He had her. A sinister discovery. Jack barely made it out of the clerk's office when his phone buzzed. Sarah. "Jack, are you sitting down?" she asked, voice unsteady. "No. What's wrong?" "I just went through some old HOA files," she whispered. "You were right. This isn't just about David's house." Jack's stomach tightened. "What did you find?" There was a pause. Then, in a hushed voice, Sarah said, "They've done this before." Jack's breath hitched. "What?" "The same pattern. The same fake violations. The same sudden foreclosures while owners were out of town or deployed," Sarah said. "Jack, they've been targeting military families for years." Jack felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath his feet. "This isn't just about property," Sarah continued. "It's a system. They target homeowners who can't fight back. They issue violations, rack up fines, hide tax payments, then seize the properties and sell them to developers." Jack's mind raced. "How many?" Sarah exhaled shakily. "I found 4 other families who lost their homes this way. And Jack, one of them, a retired Marine, died of a heart attack a week after being evicted." Jack gripped the phone, rage boiling in his chest. Victoria wasn't just corrupt. She was a predator. Jack's counterattack begins. Jack had everything he needed: proof of fraud, violations of state law, and a pattern of illegal foreclosures. Now, he just needed the right people to listen. He made 2 calls. First, to David's lawyer, to prepare an emergency injunction to halt the demolition immediately. Second, to Senator Richard Collins, a longtime advocate for veterans' rights. Jack didn't hold back. "Senator, you need to hear this." Within minutes, Collins had his legal team and an investigative journalist on the case. Then, Jack sent one final message. To Victoria. A simple email with the 1950 deed attached and one line: "See you in court." The battle escalates. Jack sat on his front porch, watching Victoria's house across the street. He knew she'd seen the email. Within an hour, her lawyer was parked in her driveway, pacing back and forth, arguing into his phone. She was losing control of the game. But Jack wasn't ready for what came next. That night, as he reviewed the evidence again, his doorbell rang. When he opened it, he found a large man in a black jacket standing there. "Can I help you?" Jack asked cautiously. The man didn't answer. He simply handed Jack an unmarked envelope and walked away. Jack hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A formal cease and desist letter. The message was clear. "Drop this, or face consequences." Jack smirked. If Victoria thought she could scare him off with a legal threat, she was dead wrong. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was war. Jack barely had time to react before his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his pulse spiking when he saw the caller ID. David Carter. He fumbled to answer, his fingers trembling. "David." "Hey, cousin," David's voice came through, calm but filled with something Jack hadn't heard in a long time: controlled fury. "I just landed. What the hell is going on?" Jack let out a shaky breath. "David, listen to me. They're trying to steal your house. Victoria's got the HOA in her pocket. She's fast-tracked the demolition. We've got evidence, fraud, backroom deals, even state violations. But we're running out of time. They're moving fast." Silence. Then David spoke, voice hard as steel. "Where are they now?" Jack swallowed. "They've scheduled the final demolition hearing tonight. I'm heading there now." David exhaled slowly. "I'll meet you there." Jack blinked. "Wait, you just landed. You need time." "I don't need time," David interrupted. "I need my house back." Jack could practically hear the war drum beating in his cousin's chest. The general wasn't asking for permission. He was preparing for battle. The HOA's last move. The community center was packed when Jack arrived. Victoria had made sure of that. The entire HOA board was there, along with investors, developers, and city officials. Everyone who stood to profit from David's home being razed to the ground. And of course, Victoria sat at the center of it all, perfectly composed, confident in her victory. Jack pushed through the crowd, forcing his way toward the front. He could hear Victoria's voice echoing over the microphone, spinning her web of lies. "This vote is about progress," she declared. "It's about improving home values, ensuring a safe and thriving community. General Carter's house, while historically significant, has sadly fallen into disrepair." Jack gritted his teeth. She was selling the lie perfectly. A murmur spread through the crowd. A few people nodded in agreement, others hesitated, unsure. And then, the doors burst open. The air shifted. Jack turned, and his breath caught. David Carter stepped inside. Dressed in full military uniform, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights, he walked with the kind of authority that silenced a room without saying a word. For the first time, Victoria's mask cracked. Her fingers tightened around the podium, knuckles turning white. Well, she recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "General Carter, what a surprise, David didn't even look at her. Instead, he slowly, deliberately made his way through the crowd, stopping at the front, towering over the HOA board. "I heard you were making decisions about my home," he said, voice even but lethal. Victoria's smile faltered. "General, David cut her off, placing a thick file onto the podium with a resounding thud. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. "You're going to call off the demolition, immediately." Victoria let out a nervous laugh. "David, I understand this is emotional for you, but the board has already voted." "Then the board made an illegal vote," David snapped, flipping open the file. "See, I did some reading on the plane. Turns out my home is under historical protection. You never got state approval, which means this entire process, it's illegal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. HOA members started whispering, exchanging nervous glances. Victoria's smile tightened. "That's a bold accusation, General, but we followed protocol." David turned to Senator Richard Collins, who had just stepped into the room with 2 legal aides and a court representative. "I hope so," David said coldly, "because I invited some friends." Victoria's face drained of color. The senator strode to the front, holding up an official-looking document. "By order of the State Attorney General's office, all HOA activities related to General Carter's property are hereby suspended pending a full investigation into fraud, coercion, and abuse of power." Silence. Then, a single voice rang out. "You lied to us, Victoria!" Jack turned to see Mrs. Dawson, a longtime resident, standing up. "I supported you," she shouted. "You told us this was legal. You said General Carter had abandoned his home." More voices rose in outrage. Victoria tried to compose herself, but she was losing control fast. Then, suddenly, a man stood up from the investor section and bolted for the exit. Robert Harper, Victoria's husband. Jack's eyes widened. "Stop him!" 2 officers grabbed Robert before he could reach the door. He struggled, but there was nowhere to run. "I think we all know what's happening here," David said, voice dangerously calm. He walked up to Victoria, looking her dead in the eye. "You're a fraud, and you used my absence to try and steal my home." Victoria was shaking now. I can fix this," she stammered. "Let's talk." "No," David said flatly. "You had your chance." At that moment, one of the senator's aides approached Jack, handing him a thick folder. "Sir," the aide said, "you should see this." Jack opened it, and his heart stopped. Inside were blueprints for the community center, but not just any blueprints. They were dated 6 months before Victoria issued the first violation against David's home. Proof that this had been planned long before any HOA violations ever existed. Jack turned to David. They were going to do this no matter what. David's jaw tightened. "And now we have the proof." He turned back to Victoria, who was visibly trembling. Outside, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. "I hope you kept good records, Victoria," David said. "Because you're going to need them." And with that, the doors burst open again, this time with FBI agents stepping in. Victoria paled completely. The war was over. But Jack knew the real reckoning was just beginning. Victoria Harper had spent years building her empire of fear, manipulating homeowners, silencing dissenters, and profiting off the backs of those who couldn't fight back. But now, her kingdom was collapsing. The moment the FBI agent stepped into the room, the entire HOA board fell into a stunned silence. The once powerful Victoria, always poised, always in control, looked utterly lost. Her husband, Robert, had already been escorted out in handcuffs, his attempt to flee failing spectacularly. The moment they caught him, they found exactly what they needed: contracts, blueprints, and financial records linking him to the fraudulent land deal. But Victoria? She still had one last card to play: desperation and deception. As agents moved in, she straightened her shoulders, gripping the edges of the podium like it was the last thing tethering her to reality. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a gross misunderstanding," she announced, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "The HOA board followed every legal procedure. This is an overreach. These men," she gestured toward David and Senator Collins, "are using intimidation tactics to undermine the integrity of our community." Jack couldn't believe her audacity. Even cornered like a rat, she still thought she could talk her way out. "Victoria!" David's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "You've been caught. This isn't a negotiation." Victoria turned, her smirk wavering. "General, I understand you're upset, but—" David didn't let her finish. He walked up to her, reached into his pocket, and held up a stack of checks. The room gasped. "These," David said, his voice dangerously calm, "are my HOA payments. Every single one, cleared by my bank. The same payments you claimed were lost in the mail." Victoria froze. Senator Collins stepped forward. "And here's the real kicker," he said, flipping open a folder. "We have records of you, personally, backdating violations, forging meeting minutes, and directing construction companies before any votes were cast." A hush fell over the room. Jack watched Victoria's last shred of composure crack. That's not possible," she stammered. I wasn't—" One of the FBI agents pulled out a tablet. "Let's hear it from you then," the agent said. He pressed play. A voice filled the room. Victoria's voice. "I don't care if the paperwork isn't final yet. Tear it down before he gets back. We'll sort out the details later." The entire room recoiled in shock. Jack turned to see Mrs. Dawson, the elderly woman who had once defended Victoria, cover her mouth in horror. "You lied to us," she whispered. Victoria backed away, her hands shaking. "No, someone must have—" But no one was listening anymore. The final nail had been hammered into her coffin. The unraveling. As Victoria descended into panic, the FBI agents didn't hesitate. One stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Victoria Harper, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." Jack watched her entire world crumble in real time. The woman who had wielded power so effortlessly was now powerless. She tried to resist, twisting in their grip. "I have rights! This is a mistake!" But the agents didn't stop. As they escorted her out, the neighbors, once fearful, once under her control, began to cheer. Jack locked eyes with David. It was over. Victoria had fallen. But David wasn't smiling. He turned to Jack, his jaw set. "This isn't just about me. They did this to others." Jack nodded. "And now we make sure they pay for every single one." The final twist. As the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from Victoria, Jack knew the war wasn't over yet. Because in the wreckage of the case files, one last document surfaced. A list of properties, military families, widows, veterans, all targeted the same way David had been. Jack's stomach turned. "This was bigger than we thought," he muttered. David exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Then we bring it all down." And with that, they prepared for the next battle. The dust had finally settled. Victoria Harper was gone, her empire of deceit reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered across the neighborhood. The once feared HOA board had been dismantled, its corrupt members facing legal consequences. The fraudulent community center project? Cancelled. And most importantly, David's home would stand once more. Jack stood on the newly rebuilt front porch, watching as volunteers, neighbors, veterans, and even complete strangers worked together to finish what Victoria had tried to destroy. The same community that once feared her power had come together to reclaim their voice. As he ran his fingers over the fresh wood railing, he thought back to everything that had happened. The threats, the legal battles, the desperate chase in the middle of the night. It had all led to this moment, and yet the most unexpected thing wasn't the victory itself. It was who showed up to help rebuild. Redemption comes in unexpected places. Jack glanced toward the community center lot, now an open field waiting for its new purpose. A group of young volunteers carried supplies, laying the foundation for something far more meaningful than the luxury condos Victoria had once envisioned. Among them was a familiar face, one Jack never expected to see. Victoria's daughter. She moved quietly, head down, helping a veteran secure a support beam. When she caught Jack's gaze, she hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she walked over. She paused, searching for the right words. I didn't know how bad it was. What my parents did. Her voice faltered. Jack studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're here now, he said simply. She exhaled in relief. I just want to make things right. Jack smiled faintly. Then keep showing up. A new beginning. David's home wasn't just rebuilt, it was reborn. This time, every brick, every nail, every coat of paint carried a story. Veterans who had never met David before flew in from across the country to lend a hand. Families who had once been too afraid to speak up now stood together, stronger than ever. And the fight didn't stop there. David and Jack founded the Homeowners Defense Alliance, a coalition dedicated to helping other military families fight back against corrupt HOAs and predatory developers. Within months, they had dozens of cases on their desks, stories just like David's. Stories of families who had been bullied, tricked, or outright robbed of their homes while they were serving their country. They weren't just rebuilding a house, they were rebuilding trust. A lesson for us. All standing on that porch, watching his cousin's daughter dance in the yard, Jack realized something profound. It wasn't just about exposing corruption or winning battles in court. It was about community. It was about the people who chose to stand up when it mattered. About the neighbors who refused to stay silent. About the power of unity against those who abuse their power. Too often people believe they are powerless against the forces that manipulate and control their lives. That one person can't make a difference. But David had proved them wrong. Jack had proved them wrong. And so had every single person who refused to let fear silence them. So the question is, what would you do? Would you let injustice slide, convincing yourself it's not your battle? Or would you stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right? Because if there's one thing this story proves, it's that one person can make a difference. And when people stand together, they can change everything. The final word. The neighborhood was no longer a place of fear, ruled by an iron-fisted HOA. It was a community again, one that looked out for its own. And as Jack watched the final nail go into place, securing a plaque on David's porch that read, "Home is worth fighting for," he smiled. Because this was how you won. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up against injustice, hit that like button, subscribe, and follow us here at the Story Forge. Your voice matters, and your story might just change the world.